Backed. So, Roguelikes, are they red enough? Oh, yeah. Oh, they're all so rouge. No, okay, that's not it. Hi, the talk here is pick a winner. It is roughly about character creation processes. And the subtitle, why has Ben talking about 4X's from the 90s for so long? Trust me, when I was putting this together, I was a little worried about all these 320 by 200 resolution screenshots. I thought you would be very bored by them. And then I realized the audience. And then I realized you're all gonna think I'm putting on airs. So I'm Ben McGraw, and I'm the founder of Bread Brothers Games. We do have an unannounced roguelike that we've been working on for a while, but we're currently finishing up a comedic JRPG we've also been working on for quite a while. 5 years at this point. I was also the executive producer of the 2011 roguelike Dungeons of Dreadmore. The team thanks you. I did officially, like, what a executive producer does is not much. I like to say I did less than 1%, but more than 0. I've personally been making indie games since about 1997. It was so long ago that we just called ourselves amateur game makers back then because indie wasn't a thing yet. Also, that was 20 years ago. Does anyone actually know about VergeRPG.com? No, okay, that's how old it was. So this is what I usually look like. My barber did something interesting to me today. So this is what I usually look like, and people come up to me all the time and tell me that I look like Seth Rogen. And usually they just say, did you know you look like Seth Rogen? I'm like, yes, I've been informed multiple times today even. But I prefer to think myself as a happier Jonathan Colton, or at least a less sad one. Or if we're going fully delusional, a temporarily embarrassed George Clooney. But I'm here today to talk to you about the first few minutes of your game. That first 5 or so minutes, it's such an important time in a young player's life. So full of wonder and possibility. Now I'm going to make a few assumptions here, because it's a talk and we can't go narrow. I'm going to assume that you have some sort of character build process in your game. And if you don't, it's fine. It's just, enjoy the acting. And I'm going to assume that you're making a roguelike because you're here. And assuming those things, this is how I see the baby player's life going in those first few minutes. You look through all the pretty options and you decide on a build. And then you run out into the world. And then you die. Because this is a roguelike. So you roll a new character. And then you try again. And you die again. Because this is a roguelike. And so on. And so on. And now you're like 5 minutes into the game. And you've died several times, and you, the player, are kind of grouchy. Even experienced roguelike players might be feeling miffed and dissatisfied at this point. I mean, you've died all of the deaths before in all the other games. What's this game bringing to the table that's going to excite you? Are you going to have to play 40 hours to find out that there's nothing new? And what about the completely new people that you want to buy your game, assuming that you're in it for the money? People who aren't into roguelikes yet, or aren't familiar with the lethality of our tropes. They've died like 4 times in 5 minutes, and they don't see the fun. Minute 5, they were killed again. Minute 6, they're heading straight to this page. Oh gosh, we gotta give them a reason to stay. There's a few ways you can keep people and make death funny. You can try humor. And that goes a pretty long way, but it may not be theme appropriate for your game. Dreadmore was a funny game, so there was a long array of things that kept people entertained when they died, from hitting them over the head with this congratulations screen every time it happened, to having clever achievement interactions you'd immediately encounter in the first few minutes. There's like several about very common deaths in the first few minutes that, like, oh, I'm dead. Oh, I got an achievement, So that kept them light. My favorite one was if you died by kicking down a door. That was it hurts. Humor can get you pretty far, but it's not without its own perils. It's pretty hard to write well-paced humor, and as I said before, it may not be theme appropriate for your game. Also, reusing the same gag can get really old really fast. Low penalty. It's another way you can make people not mind death so much. There's a metric ton of things Spelunky gets right, but one of the best things it gets right for that beginning of game experience, in my opinion, is the incredibly low penalty to death. Like, you're just jumping back into the game immediately in Spelunky if you die. This is an affordance games without character build systems should absolutely leverage, but it's kind of not appropriate for this talk. You can also give the many deaths a sense of accomplishment to the player, like the deaths themselves. I think Super Meat Boy does an incredible job of this. And if the subtitle of the talk at the beginning didn't give it away, I'm going to go all over the place genre-wise for inspiration here. So in Super Meat Boy, if you can make each death meaningful in some way, so when a player gets it, it doesn't feel like a penalty, you've won them back from that I'm angry spot. If you're not familiar with Super Meat Boy, you run through these incredibly lethal levels, and this is a screenshot after you beat the level, and each one of those little red boxes is one of your runs. All of your runs are recorded, and they're played back simultaneously. So it's making death feel rewarding, because once you've made this association that I get to see this explosion of Meat Boys, it feels better. And this makes the player feel badass instead of discouraged. The first time that you see one of these, the rest of the deaths don't matter so much anymore. So that's another way you can go about this. You can get gifts from previous runs. So I've been really into the really cool Windows 3.1 themed roguelike Kingsway lately. It's really fun. It's on Steam. I'm not affiliated. They also do the humor thing. But they do a thing that a lot of roguelikes do. As you die, you accumulate a currency, and you can spend it on unlocking new starting items for next runs. Or when a character dies, you can have them bequeath a specific item that character had as a one-time gift to a future new character, and that's pretty good, It's like, oh, my death wasn't in vain. Have a curvy dagger, Anyway, all of these are good ways to make deaths not suck, that constant treadmill of death not suck, and they're all worth their own talk, I'm sure, but it's not my talk. See, I kind of lied in that little animation we showed a few minutes ago. Remember this? That's not representative of the game. This is. So yeah, we're talking, depending on the complexity of your build screen, the user could be spending a lot of time in that first 5 minutes in that build screen. This is Dreadmore's beginning skill tree selection screen. There's 55 skills there. Depending on how complicated your build process is, a large portion of those vital first minutes are in that menu, and the possibilities in that menu themselves need to sell the game far in advance of the gameplay. This is the premise I'm going with here is fully in a game like this, and not all roguelikes are like this, but in a game like this, you need to make this really sell it with what's going on. So, things I'm not talking about first. I'm not talking about customization screens for character appearance. They have their merits and all, but I think it's usually a one and done experience unless you're got some sort of agenda. If you're familiar with the people making the ugliest faces they can, and they usually don't say anything about the gameplay. I'm also not talking about stat allocation screens. These tend to be simple, and you jump through them pretty quickly. So what am I talking about? So let's look at some 4X games from the 90s. Roguelikes aren't the only genre that's known for brick wall learning curves and rapid death. In the late 90s, I became obsessed with these two games. Master of Orion and Master of Magic, Master of Orion 2 specifically, I hope I don't offend anyone. Moo 1's fine, but just not mine. And I just became obsessed with these, and like really, really obsessed with them. I'm going to focus on Master of Magic specifically, but both of these have the same properties I'm going to talk about. So Master of Magic was a brutally hard game. And if you're unfamiliar, it was like Civ 1 mixed up with Magic the Gathering, and I don't know, what has isometric squad-based combat? The original XCOM? It was like a grab bag of a bunch of stuff. And it's hard. I would almost say it's impossible to properly learn without some facts. You frequently, like 99% of the time, run into challenges that outclass you from the get-go. And there's no threat estimating feature in the way of this encounter looks really tough before you enter a combat. It's just trial and error, and it is incredibly, incredibly lethal. And frustratingly lethal, the bad kind of death lethal. And this was in 1995 as well. There wasn't GameFAQs.com. There were crappy ISP web pages at best, and most people didn't have internet yet. You had to go buy guides out of paper. And you had to know that the paper existed. Anyway, I neither had the internet at that time nor knowledge of the strategy guide at the time or even money to buy it at the time because, I was a teenager. So I kept throwing myself at this impossible game over and over and over and over again. And I would rage quit and I would leave it alone for a few months. But inexorably, I would come back. I eventually got good. And I still play it to this day. It's one of those things that's in my permanent playing queue. Later, when I started designing games that weren't JRPGs, my mind kept coming back to the specific experience, the specific addictive experience. Why did I love these games that were mean, that were cruel? Why did I keep coming back? Was I some sort of game masochist? They both were named Master, after all. Was it just Stockholm Syndrome? But then a revelation hit me, and it was about the character build system. Here is the Master of Magic character select screen, and we are currently looking at one of the pre-built characters. Look at Tlaloc here. Under his portrait, you can see that he's got 4 books of nature magic, 5 books of death magic, and a skill called Reward. He also has a sweet headdress. And here's Jafar. He's got mono blue sorcery in the game, and he is an alchemist. Yep. These are totally pre-built characters. But what if I click on that custom button down there? Oh yeah, a build screen. And I've got 11 picks right here. Sweet, delicious build points. So let's just try something. We'll put 4 into life magic. And we'll start looking at the skills. Hey, look at this alchemy skill. It changes fundamental rules of the game. That's all you need to get out of that. So does Artificer. It changes fundamental rules of the game, important rules of the game, and it starts me with 2 free spells that aren't available until mid-game. That's really cool. This Warlord one is so good it costs 2 picks. So there's things that there's like a variant scale in this pricing. So let's just hypothetically take that Warlord skill and put the rest into Chaos Magic, because Buddy the Lizard Man looks like he's the life of the party type. It looks like the number of books I put into a school of magic let me choose that many -1 spells, specific spells from the common spells of that. Quick, done. Yeah, let's play. Oh shit, I'm dead again. This is really becoming a theme of this talk. Well, if at first you don't succeed, let's try another custom wizard. Hi, Merlin. Hi, Tony. Let's put 1 book into each school of magic. Diversify that portfolio. Oh, that's interesting. I can't have both life and death magic. I've learned a design constraint and something about morality from the authors. Whatever, let's just load up on a bunch of skills too. Tony, the warlord, channeler, conjurer, artificer, alchemist, rolls right off the tongue. Oh, it didn't work. Tony had no focus. He's some sort of jerk of all trades. Now let's put 10 books into sorcery books and take the sorcery mastery skill. Tony Jr. is going to specialize. Besides, I get almost all of the common spells this way, and Phantom Warriors are really sweet. And we got farther that time, let's say. Screw it. Tony III is going to put all 11 picks just into sorcery. We're going to get that sorcery PhD. Holy crap! I didn't know I could do this. I can start with uncommon and rare spells if I just straight invest in magic. Screw Phantom Warriors, I'm getting Phantom Beasts. They're way cooler. So yeah, that's just an example of some of the discoveries I was making while playing this over and over and over and over again. And when I reflected upon it, the big thing that really kept me coming back to this incredibly hard, broken game in those early stages was this entire process. It was partly the joy of discovering new interactions between skills in the build screen. It was the joy of finding new interactions between spells in my spell book that I picked on that build screen, or that I picked on that build screen and acquired later. It was sometimes discovering things about the build process itself occasionally, all of it hinting at a depth of design that promised more. The pain and annoyance of the many deaths was lessened for me by the idea that maybe I could build my way out of it. The first time I visited that customized screen, just reading through everything started the gears in my head churning with ideas. And there's so many builds I wanted to make. And in the time it took to get through them all, I'd learned enough about the game that there were more builds I wanted to make now. And as an aside, all the while that was happening, I was learning how to navigate the rest of the game too, and got good. This isn't a non sequitur, I promise. Wizards of the Coast makes a little card game called Magic the Gathering. They've been making supplements and bank for 25 years now. And part of their success is in their fantastic research and design process. I highly recommend reading some of their design articles if you're interested in any aspect of game design. They have loads to share, and like the amount that is applicable to video games is just legion. Anyway, I'm going to focus on just one narrow thing they talk about. Wizards of the Coast has identified 3 main psychographics, that is, 3 main player archetypes that define their player base. And out of one of them, they dubbed that one Johnny, who is defined by, and I think Janie is it's Johnny Janie, I think, who is defined by, among other things, a craving to find combos and discover new interactions. So yeah, we're back to the Dungeons & Dreadmore build screen here. This is the build screen in the final iteration with all the X packs, and there's 55 skills that you can pick, and you pick 7 of them. They're all flat costed, so they all cost 1 slot, but you have 7 out of 55. Yep. Okay, we're not going to be able to show every combination. This is how you describe the math behind the number of possibilities at play here. And it's actually one of the more succinct mathematical statements. 55 choose 7, right? This is the evaluation of that, and that's how many unique builds there are in Dungeons of Dreadmore. It wouldn't be a roguelike talk without large numbers. This is the entire design space that your players get to build in. It's huge. And players with Johnny tendencies will eat this up. But you can't really plan for everything. You don't get to balance everything easily with that many decisions to make. So how do you approach this? How do you allow this very interesting rules-breaking, rules-changing type of character development process and make a game that works? So these are just a few of the games that came out to the top of my head when I think about continuous development in games. Each of these games has or had large, active communities that were seeking out interesting combinations of skills. Each of these development teams, in response, because these development teams wanted to make a balanced game, they would patch and patch and patch in response to the players probing at their game space, this large combinatoric game space. Nerf this, tweak that, restrict this, ban that, create new counterbalance skills over there. If you're going to make a game with interactive effects and massive combinatorics and you want balance, you are in for a long slog. Sure, you could start with some sort of mathematical equivalency base for all the skills, where like one of these is equal to one of those, and the power level of the skill is, the average skill is 5 power, and that means you can do 10 damage for 1 point of that. It's something like that. You could like try and set an exchange rate between the aspects of your skills, but you're almost certainly going to miss something. After all, the Holy One didn't figure this out until his third try. So you can try to court balance through a great deal of effort and maybe get there, but there is another path. You cannot balance. Broken things can be fun. It's fun to break system. It's fun to discover exploits. It makes you feel good and to find things like this. That makes the players feel powerful and badass. It makes communities happen, actually. In the early days of Dreadmore, those were the most active community days, and like the forums were all about discovery of these things, and then the team would respond to them and like fix them and patch them and all. It just creates things to talk about early on and continuing on if you keep them there. Now, I'm not saying there aren't destructive ways that these powerful like combination of moves couldn't interact, and like there are reasons to nerf certain things, but like, hey, let them have fun more. And I'm not saying you have to have no structure and no balance at all, mind you. You should provide structure and balance early on, but if those later level higher powered interactions suddenly yield totally broken in a fun way effects, don't sweat it. I talked at length about how interesting possibilities kept me interested in Master of Magic long enough for me to understand the rest of the game. But once you get past that learning wall, it was the busted interactions at the later levels that still makes it incredibly fun for me. Busted interactions fueled by the various interactions of all its spells and abilities and whatnot. Single-player games especially can get away with this broken by design methodology because you're not ruining someone else's day in a competitive fashion. This whole balanced at low levels, broken by design at higher levels concept I call the Disgaea effect. That's a real screenshot. The Cliff Note version of Disgaea, if you're not familiar, is that it's a tactical RPG, and in the normal story mode, you can beat it at around level 60 or so, and it's a perfectly well-balanced game and a reasonable game. And the extra content gets up to level 9,999 for each potential character, and that's just the tip of like its grinding like surface. It's actually got a lot in common with roguelikes in a lot of interesting ways, but that's a different talk. So yeah, you can embrace the chaos. Jeez. Or not. It's just an opinion. It's just an option. But if you choose to engage your players early on with many game-changing choices during character builds, you're accepting a combinatorically complex road. The benefit is that you're going to be interesting to the Johnnies, to the players who see possibility and crave making combos. The downside is that you've created too much possibility to humanly deal with before release, no matter how well you've thought about it, and will either have to tweak a lot as the players discover things about your game you didn't know existed, or just accept it. But whichever way you go, I'll probably play it. I'm addicted after all.